Hey, good morning, members of Mount Olivet United Methodist Church. I think what we're going to do before we get started, and full disclosure, I am an AME, so I understand the church. We're going to start this thing off with a prayer, and that prayer will be led by our very own chair of our Religious Affairs Committee. Many of you know her, the Reverend Dr. Delisha Davis. Dr. Davis.
Good morning, everyone. What a blessed opportunity it is for me to be here with you virtually. Let us look to the Lord in prayer. Gracious and loving Lord, everything you do reveals your glory and majesty. Open our eyes to see what you are doing in our lives. Let us marvel at your good gifts and your wise provision. Your acts are amazing. We cannot comprehend the number of blessings you pour out on us from day to day. As we gather today from the NAACP, from Mount Olivet, and throughout Arlington, we pray that you will fill our hearts, our minds, and our souls. Transform us and make us more like you. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, we pray. Let everyone say, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Davis. We're going to go into screen sharing mode. Okay. All right. Once again, good morning. My name is Julius D. Spain Sr., many call me JD, and I'm, again, president of Arlington Branch NAACP here in Arlington, Virginia, where we've been since 1940. We have today a little over 1,000 members in our branch. In this brief hour this morning, we are going to provide a little bit about what we do and how at the end of the day, it's like a call to action, how you can help us, help our community move forward in this current climate in ways perhaps you didn't know about, right? So civil rights and social justice is what we're all about. So let me move to the next slide here. This morning, these are your briefers. I'm here. We also have the third VP, Mike Hemminger, who's with us. We have Reverend Dr. Delisha Davis, you've already heard. Perhaps Sister Rosa Dunkley may come on. She's our vice chair. And of course, the one and only Ms. Kathleen McSweeney. I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Davis for just a few moments to say some words about the Religious Affairs Committee, and then we're going to pivot and move over into the presentation, where Kathleen and Mike is going to give you some background on housing here in Arlington. Once they're completed with their presentation, they're going to turn the reins over to me. I'm going to talk about criminal justice. I'm going to lean in a little bit about some things about the NAACP you should know. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So this will be, I think, an enlightening hour. So we thank you for your time and attention. And without any further ado, Pastor Davis.
Good morning again. This morning, I just want to share for a brief moment about the Religious Affairs Committee. It is still fairly new in the Arlington branch of the NAACP, but has historically been one of the leading committees in the NAACP. Religious Affairs partners with local faith communities, so that can be churches as well as other types of congregations in the community, to come together for the purposes of membership in the NAACP, for voter registration and engagement. And so in that, when we partner together in those times, we generally try to ensure that everyone is a voting member and preparing people for all that they need in order to go out to vote each year. And so one of the focuses for Religious Affairs this year is partnering with faith communities in our area. We already have 8 churches that have signed up between March and May to host voter registration drives. And we encourage you, if you feel led, to do so this year. We also welcome any and everyone from the NAACP to be a part of the Religious Affairs Committee. So if you are willing today to join the NAACP, you are so welcome to be a part of Religious Affairs Committee, where we talk monthly about our progress in each of our local churches and faith communities, as well as we send out information to keep them informed about what our local branch is doing. Again, thank you for the privilege of being with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. All right, now here we go. We're gonna get ready. Kathleen McSweeney and Michael Heminger are gonna give a presentation. It's probably gonna go around 15 minutes or so on housing. All right, the floor is yours, guys. Mike and Kat.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us this morning. I want to introduce Michael Heminger, who's with me today. He's NAACP Vice President, as you've heard. He's also a housing commissioner here in Arlington and many, many other things. Mike is very engaged in the community. And I'm Kathleen McSweeney. I'm an NAACP member. I'm also the board chair of Challenging Racism, and also a commissioner here in Arlington as well on the Joint Facilities Advisory Commission. I chair that committee. So we're just very happy to be here today to talk to you about housing. Oh, before we actually start, I did want to mention, first of all, we're going to go through a lot of information very, very quickly. And for some of you, it may be the first time you're ever hearing this. For many others, I think maybe a lot of you know some of this information, but there are very dense slides. There's a lot of information. And I just wanted to let you know that if you contact Monty after the program, she can send you out the slides so that you can actually look at them, at your leisure. Also, some of you may be uncomfortable with some of the information that we're talking about, and that's okay. Discomfort leads to inquiry, which leads to knowledge and growth and action. And that's why we're here in conversation with you today. Now I want to turn it over to Mike.
Thanks so much, Kathleen, and good morning, everyone. It's a real treat to be with you all. I'm excited to run through this presentation, but before I do, we should acknowledge that for thousands of years, Indigenous nations lived relatively uninterrupted in Virginia and throughout the Americas until the first European settlers came in the early 1500s. During that time, most of central Arlington is depicted on historic maps as forested areas. It was home to elk, deer, bear, turkey, and a variety of other woodland animals that were hunted for food. The people who lived and hunted in the area, they were known as the Notchachunk and the Dogue people. Captain James Cook's writings in the 1948 drawing that you see on your screen now, it identified a village located near Gravelly Point. We'll take the next slide, please. Thank you. All right, now we'll briefly talk a little bit about Freeman's Village and Arlington's Black property owners neighborhoods. Next slide, please, and I'll pass it over to Kathleen.
Thank you, Mike. So Freedman's Village, and this is a picture of it, was founded in 1863. It was ordered by the Secretary of War and established on the estate that Robert E. Lee lived on, which was his wife's estate, the Custis family. And it had enslaved about 70 people on the estate prior to the war. The families living in Freedman's Villages paid rent, established churches, and ran schools. The government attempted to close Freedman's Village several times. In 1888, John Syphax, whose mother had been enslaved at Arlington House, wrote to the Secretary of War on behalf of the residents to negotiate settlements for improvements to be made to the properties of Freedman's Village. It ended up closing in 1900, and it made way for Arlington National Cemetery, and most residents, actually several residents, did receive some compensation. Many of the relocated families ended up moving to East Arlington, which was the site that is around and including the present-day Pentagon. Mount Olive Baptist Church purchased land for homes, and the church in this area and this subdivision was known as Queen City and was populated by African-American homeowners. When the parking lots and roadways around the Pentagon were built, the Queen City residents, again, were forcibly relocated and their lands taken by eminent domain. They received, some of them received some compensation, but many ended up moving to other neighborhoods in Arlington, like Penrose, Green Valley, and Arlington View, but also many others were forced to leave the county.
All right, so at the end of the 19th century, believe it or not, about 38% of the county's population was made up of Black families. Let's all take a moment just to quickly think about that. 38% of Arlington was Black. There were only a few neighborhoods where Black families could own a home at that time. Racial covenants, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, made most other properties off limits, I should say. Some of these covenants still exist today, and you may be surprised to see that one of these covenants, or a covenant similar, is listed on the home that you currently own. This is referred to often as de jure segregation. Changes did come about as Arlington grew from a rural area to a more denser community. Additional neighborhoods began to form, and zoning regulations were introduced during the early part of the 20th century. Before I kick it over to Kathleen, I just wanted to highlight that the current Black population of Arlington is about 9%. So went from almost 40% to just under 10%. Over to you, Kathleen.
Thanks, Michael. So we're going to talk a little bit more about restricted deed covenants. And so as Arlington developed, many of the deeds on single family homes outside the Black neighborhoods contained covenants that restricted who could buy the houses there in those neighborhoods. And in 1920s Virginia, it was very likely that these covenants were designed to restrict both African American and also Jewish and other families considered non-white from purchasing homes. For example, in my own neighborhood, the deed for the Lyon Park Community House and many homes nearby read, and it's highlighted in yellow here, neither said property nor any part thereof, nor any interest therein shall be loaned, sold, or leased to anyone not of the Caucasian race for a period of 99 years from September 1st, 1923. In 1948, in Shelley versus Kramer, the Supreme Court ruled that racial covenants could not legally be enforced. However, it was not until the Fair Housing Act of 1968 that they were outlawed completely. I would note that our Board of Governors, and actually your congregant Elizabeth Ray, who I think is with us today, the Board of Governors for Lyon Park did take action last year to remove that covenant because they determined that it really doesn't represent our community. Many of those covenants do remain, though, on deeds today, and some homeowners aren't aware of them. And of those that are, some have chosen, like Lyon Park, to get rid of them so that they no longer appear in the deed. But others have decided to leave the covenants on as a place, as a historical artifact, so that the history is actually not forgotten. I wanted to talk a little bit about how Arlington governs its land use. It's really important to put, land use and some of the ways that properties are developed in context. So what you see here is our comprehensive plan. The general land use plan, which is a part of the comprehensive plan, outlines the county's vision for how land is used in Arlington. The largely single and two-family GLUP designations have remained unchanged for about 60 years. This has frozen large areas of the county so that only single-family homes or townhouses can be built in many areas. The first zoning commission was held in 1927 to draft regulations, and the first zoning ordinance was adopted in 1930. Duplexes, row houses, and multifamily housing during this period were seen as undesirable in single-family neighborhoods, mostly because they were associated with the forms that homes took in African-American communities. In 1938, a zoning amendment was adopted that banned row houses from being built. Zoning amendments continued to be approved and required larger lots and setbacks for homes. This makes the smaller homes non-conforming, as in they don't conform to the new requirements, which then limited the improvements that could be made on that land and on those homes, and prevented those families who owned those non-conforming units from adding on to their homes and building wealth. So this directly limits the ability of homeowners of non-conforming housing to build wealth by improving those properties. And many of these properties are located in our historic Black communities. Mike?
Thanks so much, Kathleen. I love that information. I love that graphic that you presented. So the graphic that you see on the screen now is actually taken from the county's Missing Middle study, and it illustrates just how much land is dedicated to single-family neighborhoods. Over 60% of the land that you see in yellow on both maps has a land use designation of low density. And of that area, about 75% is dedicated to single-family homes. As you look at the maps, what you'll see is not much has changed from 1960 to the height of desegregation to today, I should say, which is about 50 years later. And a lot of people often reach out to me after this presentation. I say, this is one of the things that really stood out to them is that, you know, in 50 years, the map looks relatively similar to how it did before. About 25% of Arlington residents live in single family detached housing. Much of our 26 square miles of land is dedicated to low density, which means single family neighborhoods. There's very little opportunity to downsize, very little opportunity to age in place, very little opportunity to purchase your first home in Arlington. Here's something else that I want you to noodle on. You may want to write this one down. About 25% of the homes in Arlington make up 75% of the land area containing housing, meaning about 75% of Arlington's population currently lives on 25% of the land area. The areas of Arlington zoned primarily for single family detached housing overlaps with the census tract where at least 70% of the population is white, which may suggest that Arlington's current zoning framework may not support the county's goals for diversity and inclusion. Before we proceed to the next slide, let's just take a quick moment to let that data sink in. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. What you see now is a graphic from the US Census Bureau that shows us rental housing affordability in Arlington County. I'm always blown away by this slide as many times as I've done this presentation. Note that this reflects the ability of the average Black, Latino, Asian, and white family to rent in areas of Arlington based on the median income for those racial and ethnic groups. The lack of opportunity to own property, the fact that homeownership is now out of reach to all but a very small percentage of upper middle class families now due to increased land values over the last 20 years, and the inability to build generational wealth is true for many Black, Latino, and Asian families here in Arlington. Due to historic segregation and the inability to purchase homes in prior generations, Black and African American demographic group, as you see on your screen, has the least access to single family areas. This is due to generational effects of systemic discrimination and racism on income and wealth. There's really just 3 areas of our small county that are within reach for the average Black family based on income. Does this graphic surprise you? Let's take a brief pause just to soak up the information. From the 1920s to the 1960s, the federal government did take steps to actively encourage racial segregation. Kathleen, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the government did to enforce some racial segregation?
Thanks, Mike. So it's important to put all of this in context, because what was happening in Arlington, or what has happened in Arlington to limit options for Black families, should be taken in context with what was happening nationally. We want to make clear what actions our government took at the federal level to enforce segregation. And as such, that makes racism systemic. On this slide, we're showing you that due to housing losses during the Depression, the Roosevelt administration built public housing for working class families, and Black families were generally placed in high poverty, isolated neighborhoods. So the public housing was already segregated by race, by fiat, basically. The New Deal established the Federal Housing Administration in 1934. And the Homeowners Loan Corp color-coded maps in cities across the country, indicating where it was safe to insure mortgages. It was safe specifically in areas that were not Black owned, or where a lot of Black families were not living. Properties seeking mortgages in or near African-American neighborhoods were deemed high risk. And the FHA subsidized builders, creating suburbs for white families during that same period. So the underwriting manual of the FHA specifically stated incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities, and recommended that highways and other physical barriers separate Black and white neighborhoods. So by the time the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, the properties in these neighborhoods had appreciated, but Black families hadn't accrued the wealth to buy into them, further cementing the segregation of neighborhoods. Movement to integrated neighborhoods wasn't easy, and when it was done, it was generally whites moving into Black neighborhoods, which would then push Black families out. Green Valley is an example of this in Arlington, or you could certainly look across the river to Washington, D.C. to see a lot of displacement of Black families. The GI Bill was available for returning soldiers, but Black families couldn't take advantage of it to build wealth as their white counterparts could, due to the restrictive covenants, redlining, and overall lack of housing options for Black families. The police in many cities also enforce segregation, and this is important to understand, that they often supported folks trying to drive Black families out of white neighborhoods. And realtors enforced a code of ethics that prevented sales of homes to Black families in Arlington and throughout the United States. Mike?
Thanks so much, Kathleen. We learned a little bit about de facto and de jure segregation. Many are often surprised to learn that our government at every level, from the local government all the way up to the federal government, actively implemented components of racial segregation. Some of these practices still live on with us today with current zoning laws. You can sit in on a housing commission meeting and still see some of these tactics being used. Things like highways, where highways have been placed, where our toxic waste facilities are located, where we park our commercial buses, housing needs, and so much more. There's a book you may have heard of a few times. It's called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. Whenever we do this presentation, I always encourage everyone to pick up a copy, or if you'd like, listen to it via Audible. What we see on this slide is just a list of things that were, or list of actions, I should say, that were taken locally here in Arlington and in Virginia. For the last century, Arlington, Virginia has not been immune to the racism and segregation that was prevalent across the country. What we see is displacement in the form of forced relocation of African-American families. Freeman's Village, which is now Arlington National Cemetery, that's where many of the relocated families moved to East Arlington. That's the site of the current Pentagon that Kathleen talked about. Mount Olive Baptist Church purchased land for homes in the church, and this subdivision was known as Queen City. It was populated mostly by African-American homeowners. When the Pentagon was built, Queen Cities again were forcibly relocated and their lands were taken by eminent domain. We saw the formation of the Good Citizens League and the Roslyn cleanup raids. There were physical barriers erected, walls in Halls Hills, and street patterns in Johnson's Hill, Green Valley, and Halls Hill were designed to be one way in and out. This was very, very intentional. We saw disenfranchisement and poll taxes retained in Virginia after the 24th Amendment was passed, prohibiting poll taxes for federal elections. Discrimination was clearly written into zoning, banking, and deed covenants. And again, many of these practices still exist even today. Lastly, it's important to note that the founding of the American Nazi Party occurred right here in Arlington in 1958. They only left in the early 1980s. Next slide, please. So we learned a lot about how different forms of racial segregation have impacted our community in the past. It's important that we're all aware of the past and how it's paved the way for where we are today. The disparities impacts are systemic, which means that they need very little effort to maintain. Think of these systems as pretty much on autopilot. It's not enough to be neutral because these systems were intricately designed. No action means that these systems will continue on their own and continue to have disparate impacts to members of our communities. We must all make a conscious effort to disrupt these systems. We must actively take it apart piece by piece. I'll kick it back over to Kathleen to bring us home on this section of this morning's presentation and to provide some additional information. But before I do, I want to ask you a few questions to generate some insight. How do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be? What will your grandchildren say to their grandchildren about the role that you played? Kathleen, as we shift the lens and begin to look forward at ways that we can be proactive, what are some resources and ways that everyone on today's call can get into some good trouble?
Thanks, Mike. I think it is really important that after we talk to you about how we got here, that we give you some opportunities and some suggestions on how to actually change things. So the first thing is join the NAACP and work on the issues with the religious affairs or the housing committees. Attend a challenging racism class. Visit the website for a schedule on how to sign up or get a list of additional readings and resources. You should engage in our capital improvement and our budget conversations. That may sound like an odd thing to say, but how we spend our money is definitely an indication of what we value in our community. Definitely participate in the Arlington Way, which is what we call our civic engagement, and raise your voice to make sure that racial equity is part of every school boundary process, resource discussion and planning process. Advocate for revisions to the Affordable Housing Ordinance so that developers have some incentives to build on-site affordable housing here in Arlington. And provide input on the missing middle conversation, get up to speed on what we're talking about, and encourage neighbors to make room for other neighbors here in Arlington. Understand and advocate for changes in single family zoning. And as a final slide, we have listed a series of resources and recommended readings, things that we have looked at specifically in preparation for this slideshow. But there are many, many other things out there that are wonderful resources. But that's the end of our presentation. Again, if you email Monty, she'll be happy to send this out to you. And I will pass it back to JD.
Well, thank you, Kathleen and Mike, for such a great presentation. Let's give them a round of applause, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so the time is now 9:58, and I'm going to be with you for the next, I think, 15 minutes or so. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about criminal justice, right? And then I'm going to give you a call to action, right, per se. All right, let me get my slides going here. All right. Okay. All right, so we went over this slide. This was your team. You just heard from Mike and Kathleen. So what I would ask, also different ways to get engaged. This Wednesday, we actually have our housing committee is having the Arlington Fair Housing Conference. I shared this link with a short time ago in the Zoom. We'll share these slides with you, but I encourage you to think about registering for this event. At that time, our housing committee is going to, as it states here, is going to explore the state of fair housing in Arlington. We have a collaboration going along with Equal Rights Center. So yeah, please feel free to sign up and attend on Wednesday. Can't go too much further without talking about yesterday, right? I'm gonna put all this in context. Yesterday, the NAACP celebrated 113 years of existence. 113 years, February 12th, 1909. So we've been around for a while. We didn't just show up. And that is definitely a significant achievement. All right, here we go. So I'm going to show you a slide. And what I want you to do here, this is your trivia, right, for this morning. Who can tell me in the chat or just come off mute and tell me who any of these individuals are? Yeah, 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Dong. No one raised their hand. Guess what, y'all? Here we go. These individuals, Mr. Villard, Ms. Ovington, Ms. Walling, right, are 3 of the many founders, co-founders of the NAACP in 1909. All right. I thought it was important to show this slide just because, in full transparency, I find myself not only as a Methodist, but as a Black man, a lot of times speaking with audiences of individuals who don't look like me, right? So I need to go back into history and kind of reflect and tell everyone and show everyone it was definitely a multiracial, multicultural organization, and we still are today. W. Du Bois, I.D.B. Wells, those are some of our Black leaders, but it was definitely a movement in 1909. Our founders, founding group, vision, mission of the NAACP. I won't go into detail with these slides. You will get these slides just so you can have some context. All right, criminal justice. Where do we begin? Criminal justice, my friends, is quite broad, but I think it's important to note today that I'm going to lift up and talk about a few things. According to the Justice Policy Institute, Virginia spends $1.5 billion a year to operate overcrowded jails and prisons. That's your taxpayer dollars. We know for certain, right, that a disproportionate number of people of color, a lot of Blacks, right, are incarcerated for minor offenses. And it's definitely unfortunate. When we talk about schools and our youth, and there's a whole conversation to have about the school to prison pipeline, the Center for Public Integrity, Virginia schools referred students to law enforcement at a rate of 15.8 per 1,000 students, nearly 3 times the national rate. And it costs roughly $148,000 per year to incarcerate one youth in Virginia. I'm a data-driven guy. I'm sure you are as well. This is a lot of money. There are alternatives, right, to sending our youth to the detention facilities and incarcerating people of color. But what it's going to cause you to do, us to do as a community, is change our way of thinking. It's a cultural shift. And I'll be quite honest with you, not everyone's prepared. This is from the NAACP, right? So this is a part of our fact sheet. I don't need to get in and talk about the history of policing because therein of itself lies some very dark truths about the origins of policing in America, right? The slave patrol, which in and of itself is truth and facts and how it began. And we know that there is a significant amount of bias in our current system, right? Black people are 5 times more likely to be stopped without cause than any white person. And the numbers and the statistics go on and on and on and on. And as a leader, sometimes I always wonder, like, when does it stop, right? I think there's a duty, right? There's an obligation from faith-minded leaders and individuals as we walk in the light, the beautiful light, right? To really dive deep and try to figure out how do we eradicate some of these systems, again, that have disenfranchised and disproportionately affected so many people of color. Yeah, the civil rights movement was in 1960, but we find ourselves even today in 2022 fighting, through the societal ills and everything else. There's many areas of concern. And I'm not going to just, focus on one particular, but I'm talking broadly about criminal justice. From the time you turn on the TV to the time you open up the paper, everything, we see it, we're surrounded by all this negativity and issues of profiling, racial profiling. We're not trying to, as the NAACP, and I tell folks a lot, we're not trying to disband the police department. We just believe wholeheartedly that when you talk about 21st century policing in America and in our community, things have to change. And we need your help getting there. Well, folks, this is a hard pill to swallow. Because for those of you that may live in Arlington, we've had 7 deaths at the Arlington County Detention Facility since 2015. Once again, I don't need to go back to 1970 and 1980, and these are facts. And the other hard fact is all of these men have been men of color, and the average age is 47 years old. The latest individual that was incarcerated had been in a jailhouse for 2 weeks on a trespassing charge. 2 weeks. And many of these individuals they had mental and emotional issues. So our jail system has been used as a place to house folks in many cases, and that's not what he should have been. I won't talk about the details of these cases, because a lot of the last three deaths, the three deaths in the past 2 years, there's ongoing investigations. But I thought it was important to, again, bring to the forefront the hardcore reality of right here in Arlington. And when we talk about criminal justice, what we at the NAACP and our Criminal Justice Committee, what we're focusing on right now. We need to get to the bottom of this as a community. And my question to many leaders in this community is, when does it stop? What does it take? Does it take, we don't need to go there. It needs to stop. So where do we go from here? This is where your branch of the NAACP is going. And make no mistake about it. I have called as president that this, the sheriff's department, the police department, all things law enforcement, we need to have an impartial, objective assessment of operations here in our county. We have an internal oversight, independent investigations where friends are investigating friends, and I'm a former federal investigator. That's not going to cut the mustard anymore. We have asked for outside entity, whether that's the FBI, Department of Justice, to come here to Arlington and determine whether we have individuals, human and civil rights, being violated. And the only way we can really promote transparency and accountability is to get down to the bottom of it. If we want to increase trust, right, which at the end of the day increases public safety, we at the end of the day believe that Department of Justice must be involved. That's where we stand. How can you help? Well, it's not just criminal justice. The NAACP has a host of committees per our Constitution and bylaws. You're speaking with representatives of three of them today, actually two of them, religious affairs and housing. But we have a number of committees at our branch. Some aren't stood up yet because you need at least 3 members. But these are committees, areas where you can be involved, right? Whether it's communications and press, finance, freedom fund, economic development. I just thought this slide was important because you can look this over. These are the areas of where we focus at the NAACP. These are some of our members, our elected folks that came in 2009, 2 years ago, actually, just about 2021, 2022. And our terms will end December 31st of this year. So very diverse, multiracial, multicultural organization we are. I'm going to stop here because this slide deck, there's about 30 or 40 slides here and I could talk all day, but I think it's very important as we round up and have about 15 minutes left, that we open it up and have a courageous conversation and ask questions about what can you do? What's going on? How can we move forward in 2022? What I tell a lot of groups and individuals is that first, you got to find your moral compass. You have to do some self-reflection, right? And then you have to chart the course for yourself. And you may have to start out slow at first and increase speed with proficiency. But together we stand, y'all. Divided we fall. We've been divided for so long. And let's be quite honest, a lot of times people say this time of the day, each week, is one of the most segregated times in America. But I was born and raised in AME, right? I met, for many years, every Sunday. And I understand my faith. But AME church came from the Methodist religion, right? And Richard Allen and all of that stuff up in Mother Bethel. So, we all think alike. We all have, many of us believe in the God of Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, right? One book, you create and make of all things. But somehow we get taken off this path, and where we think, when we talk about policies and things going on in our community, we don't see eye to eye. We can agree to disagree, but we also got to find ways in our community, now more than ever, for my friends, to compromise and meet each other halfway. If we're unwilling to do that, I really don't know what the future holds for us. I really don't. I didn't say much about my background. I'm sure Monte and a few people have stated where I've come from, but a Southerner, 26 years in the Marine Corps, recently retired, did some time as a Fed, a contractor now. My beautiful wife, Adriana Spain, is on the line with me this morning. We'll be celebrating 30 years of marriage in December, 3 adult children, and I have an 8-month-old granddaughter who I love dearly. So I guess this time around, I have 2 older daughters. So my little granddaughter, whatever deficiencies I had in those years, I'll be able to catch and make it up. But anyway, let's open it up for some questions. If you don't mind, I really want to hear, our team want to hear from you. And it's been a pleasure to be with you this morning. God bless you. So questions, concerns.
Our first question, this came in through the chat during the housing presentation.
Hey.
This was a request from a member of our congregation for someone from the housing team to say more about the Good Citizen League and the Roslyn cleanup. The follow-up question to that is, was it discriminating? And I'll add my own commentary. I worked in Roslyn for 10 years. I'd never heard of the Roslyn cleanup before. So I'm also interested in hearing more about that.
Sure, I'm happy to take that because I happen to live in a neighborhood that was formed by the person who led these charges, Frank Lyon. He developed Lyon Village, Lyon Park, and several other places. He was a big public figure in Arlington at the turn of the century and later. Very wealthy man, and owned a lot of property that he created a lot of subdivisions here in Arlington. And so as a public figure, he took it upon himself to help clean up society as well. And down in Roslyn at the time, and there are actually, I'll find the resources and send them to you, Monty. There are some really good resources on the cleanup raids that he led with some other public figures. But they were aimed at, first of all, cleaning up what was a red light district down in Roslyn. There were some warehouses in Roslyn. It was right on the water. And there was also an African-American neighborhood, and some of the owners of, or some of them were owners of bars. And Lyon Park was a teetotaler. So, Frank Lyon was a teetotaler. So he led raids. I mean, I think they'd go in there with, baseball bats and everything, and try to drive people out of business. And so there actually was also a really great series in RL Now, written by Taylor, and I'm forgetting their last name, but I will forward that to you, Monty, so that you can actually provide it to the rest of the congregation. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, you'd think 2 years into this. If you're raise your hand using the function, we'll call on you. Another question that came in through the chat function was, if Arlington County expands areas for rental housing, how can we ensure accessibility to people of color?
Mike and Kathleen, you want to jump on that?
I was waiting to see if Mike wanted to, but
Sorry,
I'm happy
I have
to.
multiple screens here trying to unmute. I think, thank you for that question. If we look right across the river at DC or Montgomery County, they actually have some of the best examples of what we call inclusionary zoning. And so exclusionary zoning, we learned a lot about that, how it excludes people. But DC and Montgomery County, again, they have excellent examples of what is possible if we reimagine housing. And so to get a little more specific, in Montgomery County, they did an experiment, and Richard Rothstein actually talks about this in his book, but at least 15% of any new housing has to be committed affordable. And so what that does is it allows people who come from historically low income sectors of life to interact with and have these powerful interactions and socialization with people that may be more affluent, right? And people that are more affluent grow up with hopefully people that don't look like them or have a different way of thinking, and so they grow up and they get taught empathy, which is, I think, a key skill that we're missing. So to answer your question, I think inclusionary zoning would be a great step in the right direction. Kathleen, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, so I do think, certainly our affordable housing programs in Arlington generally serve people of color because it's based on income level. And as Michael showed you in one of the slides, if you're Black, Latino, Asian, you have less buying power. And so, making sure that we have committed affordable housing, making sure that we support it in every, development that's happening in Arlington. Some of our site plans and some of our, Pentagon City phase development process was just approved yesterday by the county board, and that includes some, some areas for affordability. I would also say there are other things too, making sure that our housing grant program here in Arlington is really well funded every year in the budget, because even though our committed affordable housing is about 60% of the area median income, so that means you have to earn at least 60% of the area median income to qualify for affordable housing. If you earn under that, you actually don't qualify for affordable housing. So the housing grant program helps those people who earn more, like 30, 40, 50% of the area median income, and that helps them get into affordable housing. They basically have to buy up to affordable housing. And so there's also the Arlington Community Foundation is currently doing a pilot on guaranteed income. Some of you may have heard that. Andrew Yang made that a big thing in his presidential campaign, and that's, I think, where a lot of us heard of that. But we're doing a pilot now with, I think there are 100 families in it right now, to see, what a little bit of money, a little bit more money every month does to a family, and how that helps them survive living in Arlington.
May I jump in for just a second to lift? I see there's a couple of hands up, but there's a good friend of the NAACP who's actually on this call, Aunt Venetia, who's, I believe, the housing director over Arlington County government. I just want to thank her for being with us this morning, because we at the NAACP, right, we have to work with all, not only the stakeholders in our community, but establish these relationships in our government, right? Because what Mike and Kathleen are both talking about, it does not work if we can't have these conversations and help folks like Ann and her team help change policy. So, Ann, I just want to recognize, I saw you on here earlier this morning, a little while ago, and thank you for being with us this morning. Okay, sorry, Tier.
Very good. All right, let's go to Ann Spiker. And if you'll unmute yourself.
Oh, I thought I asked the question. In regard to criminal justice reform, what is Arlington doing to address mental health needs and issues in our community that might have a positive impact on what's happening in criminal justice in our community?
Yeah, I'll take I'll speak about that, and then I'll let Mike and Kat talk about that. So what we do know, Ann, and thanks for the question, is that one, we don't have enough providers, professionals in our community. We also know that there is not enough, beds, right, facilities in our community. But what we do know for certain, right, that even with COVID, right, it has exacerbated and made this situation with our mental health just even worse, right? So I think what the county is trying to do and will need to do is put more funding into the mental health program. I would like to see more community-based outreach. We're also looking at some more training with our law enforcement professionals, having these mental professionals, healthcare professionals available. Let's say, so when you have interaction with people in the community, you don't always have to call the cops, right? That person may just need a mental health professional. So I know right now that between the Commonwealth Attorney, the sheriff, the county board, they're looking at those ways, right, to kind of what can we do from this point on. So it's going to be allocation of resources, definitely going to need funding. We need more beds, right? Let's just be honest. We can't, everyone who has a mental situation or emotion, we're sending them all to Virginia Hospital Center, where sheriffs and police a lot of times have to stay there and they're not on the beat. So it's going to require all hands on deck. But I think what has not happened, right, and is everyone's kind of working in silos, right? And we have not worked collaboratively as a community. So someone needs to lead this. So whether it's the county board, right, whether it's the county manager, I do not see a leader, right? I do not see a leader from the NAACP. This issue with mental health in our community, it's not brand new. It didn't just start, right? So we're going to do our part. I think it's funding again. I think it's resources, and putting more money towards our community-based programs. I hope that helps out a little bit, but we have a way to go. We have a way to go.
All right, let's go to Ron Haddix. Let's ask him to unmute.
Oh my goodness, Ron.
Good morning. I just saw the message this morning. Did you guys have this meeting? And so, okay, I better join just in case I get bad math by JD if I'm not attending the meeting. But anyway, JD's my friend, so he knows I'm joking with him. But the question I have is, you talked about affordable housing, and there has been an ongoing discussion right now about putting financing, helping people, existing condos, old apartment buildings, to help keep the cost down, because even these old condos is going to be expensive if the condo fee keeps rising. And I know Nicole from the SetFed was running that. I don't know what's happening with that, but I think that's another way approach to look at existing stock and not have to keep building new, right? Have you ever had that discussion, JD, anywhere on that angle? Because I know Talk is aware of it, and so is Nicole, and the people since SetFed have been talking about it. So, okay.
Mike and Kathleen, do you want to add
Sure.
anything on that? Because
Sure. Technical assistance to condo associations that are much older and not not fully funded has been something that sort of comes up annually. And so I don't know, Mike, if you know of anything more recently that has been done. I know that a lot of condo associations, especially those along the Pike, are seeing higher and higher HOA fees as a result of just living in older buildings that need a lot of work. But there have been some, I think, technical assistance that's been offered to some condo associations, but I wanted to ask Mike if he knows of anything more recent.
Yeah, it's a great question. Raise your hand, everyone on the call, if you've heard of the Serrano. What's going on at Serrano? Anybody kind of following that? Yeah. So we actually stood up a new subcommittee. It's called the Subcommittee on the Status of Aging Properties in Arlington. And right now we're really focused on looking at Serrano because a lot of those issues are aged focused just due to the length of time that property has been standing. As we close that report, we're going to transition and start looking more broadly at a lot of aging properties. We saw that incident in Florida, and I think it was a wake-up call for us to also look at how some of our aging properties in Arlington are performing and evaluating them and making sure that we have some type of plan to address those structural issues as well as other deficiencies that come with age. And if I could just piggyback off of that criminal justice question, I want to encourage everyone also to get involved with restorative justice. That's something that's relatively new to the community. It's a diversion option that is coming to Arlington very, very soon. And then also take a look at some of the arrest data and juvenile detention data. The NAACP visited that facility. What we saw was 90% of those kids that were locked up were Black and brown. And we know that's not proportionate to how the county is represented. And so we have the technology now to send people tickets in the mail if you run a red light, or if you're speeding, or if your insurance is expired. So I think that we could be potentially leveraging our police officers to go after more serious crimes and use technology for some of these like smaller level crimes that don't really keep the community safe. So back over to you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. All right, we're going to jump. We've got 4 minutes left, and Pastor Ed's going to pray us out. So that's like 4.5 minutes. So we're going to go to Susan next.
Sorry. Me, Susan Newton.
Morning, Susan.
Okay, so I wanted to ask a question about any parting words of advice for those of us who are wanting to increase our abilities to be strong allies and to really help share your messages and lift up your voices, particularly when you mentioned the county attorney's office. If you follow her on Facebook, she often gets a lot of derogatory comments about how she's not working to keep the community safe. So that is one small example. I want to be able to sort of, support what others are doing, like what all the great things the NAACP is doing and what you've talked about today. So do you have any good words of advice that we can use as allies to just reinforce the message, help amplify what you're trying to say, and really just de-escalate the conversation that it's not about people, it's about facts and figures and trying to make improvements.
Yeah, I'm gonna really ask Kathleen to weigh in on this question, but I will say at the onset that you have to be in the space and you have to live in the moment. And when you receive information or you want to engage, it's important sometimes to have these conversations. Sometimes it may tend to be confrontational, but have the conversation and be in the space. You see something from the NAACP, share it with your friends. You have to be intentional, right? Kathleen, I know you've been working with challenging racism for a number of years. You want to lean in on this a little bit?
Thanks, JD. I actually think you said it well. I mean, I think that in every forum you're in every conversation you're in, if you can provide a counter argument or just some information to say, I don't really think that's what's happening. I think this is what's happening. I think that's really helpful. And it's hard to do. It takes a lot of bravery to talk, to be in a room of people who are talking about, why we shouldn't have affordable housing, for instance. My tax dollars should be used to help those people. It's good to have people in the room who can weigh in and say, well, I actually, because of my faith, because of my belief that, we all have a right to live here, I think differently. I'm actually okay with, I'm fine with my tax dollars going to helping people who live in my neighborhood or live in my community. The kids that my kids are friends with. I want their parents to be able to live and work here in Arlington and be part of our community. But if you have, if you want to take some, look at some resources, if you want to learn how to facilitate conversations, I can certainly say Challenging Racism is here for you. And we're happy to help you do that.
Yeah, I know we need to turn this over to Tier, and thank you so much, Kathleen, for that. Tier?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Pastor Ed to get ready to pray us out. I want to say thank you to JD, Kathleen, all the folks from the NAACP of Arlington. The link for you all, I'm talking to everybody from Mount Olivet and our non-presenters, the link for you to join the NAACP of Arlington is in the chat. It'll also go out with the debriefing email that you all will receive in the coming days. Thank you for taking the time this morning. And Pastor Ed, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Pastor Tier, and thank you, members of the NAACP, for joining us at Mount Olivet today. Let us pray together. Lord God, we have heard many pieces of data and facts and experiences this day. some that we have known and other parts that are new to us. Lord, it just reveals more of what is America's original sin and how original sin is not easily eradicated, but a long journey. And Lord, I pray that as we gather together, we as people of privilege and those who have not shared that privilege, that we might learn from each other, that we might join together in this battle to eradicate racism, that your grace will empower us and sustain us, but also that your grace will push us perhaps where we would not readily go by ourselves. Be with us in this journey as we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone. Again, if you didn't get your question answered, if you'll email it to me, my email is in the chat. I will make sure those get to JD, and he will then get them answered for us. Thank you, everyone, for coming today, and have a great day.